The rancher, Jedediah, gripped the porch rail until his knuckles were bone. He'd waited 6 months for this stagecoach, 6 months of dust and solitude since he'd sent his letter and his savings. He squinted, tracing the coach's path as it rattled down the long, unforgiving road to his homestead. This was it, the arrival of Sarah, the woman from the photograph, the one who promised a new beginning. The coach groaned to a halt. The driver, a weary man named Gus, tipped his hat. "One delivery for you, Jedediah." The door swung open. A woman stepped down, her face shadowed by a plain bonnet. Jedediah's heart seized. His mouth went dry. He blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. That wasn't Sarah. Not even close. Before he could speak, a small child, a girl no older than 5, scurried out from behind the woman and clung fiercely to her skirt, her wide eyes fixed on him like he was a wolf. The woman looked up, her expression a careful mixture of exhaustion and steel. "Mr. Jedediah Thorne?" she asked, her voice steady but low. Jedediah didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was a frantic mess of questions. Who was this woman? Where was Sarah? And who was this silent, staring child? The money was gone, the contract was broken, and his entire future had just stepped off a stagecoach wearing the wrong face. He finally found his voice, a harsh croak. "You ain't Sarah." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. The woman flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. "No, sir, I am not." She clutched a worn satchel to her chest. "Sarah fell ill. She sent me in her stead. My name is Eliza." Jedediah just stared. In his 30 years on this unforgiving patch of earth, he'd seen his share of swindles, but this was a new kind of cruel. He'd paid the agency, followed the rules. He had a contract, a photograph, a promise. "You expect me to believe that?" he said, his voice flat and cold. "She just happened to fall ill and had a friend, with a child no less, ready to take her place on a journey 1,000 miles west?" Gus, the driver, coughed impatiently. "My schedule's tight, Jed. Is she staying or going back?" The decision hung in the air, heavy and immediate. Send her back? Where? To die on the road? But keeping her felt like endorsing the lie, like being the biggest fool in the territory. The child, still silent, tightened her grip on the woman's dress. Her eyes, pale and huge, never left his. They were the eyes of a cornered animal. "She can't stay here," Jedediah said, more to himself than to anyone else. Eliza knelt down, never breaking her gaze with him. "Lily," she whispered to the girl, "this is the man I told you about, the one with the kind face." A lie. He knew his face was not kind. It was weathered and hard, a map of droughts and lonely winters. But the child Lily seemed to consider it. She didn't smile, but the terror in her eyes lessened by a fraction. Eliza stood up. "I have a letter from Sarah. It explains everything." She fumbled in her satchel, her hands trembling slightly, and produced a folded, creased piece of paper. He snatched it from her. The handwriting was flowery, unfamiliar. It spoke of a sudden fever, of begging her dear friend Eliza to take her place, promising she was a good woman, a hard worker. It sounded rehearsed, false. He crumpled the paper in his fist. "This ain't worth the ink it's written with," he spat. "Get back on the coach." Eliza didn't move. She just stood there, a statue of quiet desperation. The child, Lily, finally made a sound, a tiny, choked gasp. Jedediah's gaze fell back to her. He'd built this ranch for a family, a wife, children maybe. He'd imagined laughter echoing off these bare wooden walls, not this suffocating silence. "One night," he heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. "You can stay one night. The barn is clean. You can sleep there. In the morning, you're on the first coach out, no matter where it's headed. Am I clear?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back on them and stalked into the house, the crumpled letter burning a hole in his palm. He had let a lie into his home. He just didn't know how big that lie was yet. The dinner was a silent, miserable affair. Jedediah sat at the head of the long table he'd built with his own hands, a table meant for celebration, not suspicion. He watched them over the rim of his cup. Eliza ate with a grim efficiency, as if fueling a machine. She was clearly used to hard work. Her hands, though clean, were calloused. But she moved with a certain grace that didn't fit the story of a simple seamstress from the city. The child, Lily, was another matter entirely. She refused to eat. She sat on a stool, her small plate of stew untouched, her gaze fixed on the dark window. She hadn't said a word since arriving, not one. "She needs to eat," Jedediah said, the silence grating on his nerves. "She's tired from the journey," Eliza replied without looking at him. "Tired or scared?" Eliza's head snapped up. Her eyes flashed with something he couldn't name. Not anger, but a fierce, protective fire. "She has nothing to be scared of here. Does she?" The question was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. He was the master of this house, this land. But in that moment, faced with that woman's unyielding stare, he felt like an intruder. He grunted, pushing his chair back. "I'll be in the barn. Don't touch anything." He didn't go to the barn to work. He went to watch. From the shadows of the stable, he could see the faint lamplight in the kitchen window. He saw Eliza clear the plates. He saw her trying to coax the little girl to take a bite of bread. He saw the girl shake her head, her movements small and rigid. There was something wrong with the child, a deep, settled fear that had nothing to do with him or his ranch. Later, after the lamp in the house went out, he waited. He gave them an hour before he slipped out of the stable and crept toward the main barn where he told them to sleep. He moved silently, a habit learned from hunting prey, though he wasn't sure who was the hunter and who was the hunted tonight. The barn door was slightly ajar. He peered through the crack. By the faint light of a sliver of moon, he could see them huddled in a pile of clean hay. Eliza was holding the child, stroking her hair, whispering something too low for him to hear. Their single, small satchel lay beside them. It looked pathetically light, hardly enough for a journey of a few days, let alone a new life in the West. He saw Eliza reach into the satchel and pull something out, a small, dark object. She pressed it into the child's hand. Lily clutched it to her chest, her small body finally seeming to relax. A moment later, she was asleep. Jedediah waited until Eliza's breathing deepened. Then he slipped inside. He needed to know what was in that bag. If he was going to be made a fool, he wanted to know the full scope of it. He moved toward the satchel, his boots making no sound on the dirt floor. He reached down, his fingers closing around the worn leather. He lifted it. It was lighter than he even expected. He opened the clasp and peered inside. A change of clothes for the woman, one for the child, a half-eaten apple, and that was it. Nothing else. No money, no keepsakes, no clue as to who they really were. He felt a surge of frustration. Then his eyes fell on the hay where they had been sitting. Tucked just beside the sleeping child's hand was the object Eliza had given her. It wasn't a doll. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. He picked it up. It was smooth, made of a dark wood he didn't recognize. The craftsmanship was incredible, far too fine for a simple frontier toy. As he turned it over in his palm, he saw something else. Tiny initials burned into the base of the bird. Not EL for Eliza, not SW for Sarah Wallace. The initials were MT. He placed the bird back gently, his mind racing. Who was MT? And why was this strange, valuable object the only possession this woman and child carried with them into a new, uncertain life? He backed away, melting back into the shadows. The lie he'd let in wasn't just a lie, it was a mystery. And mysteries in this part of the country often ended in bloodshed. The sun rose the next morning, but it brought no clarity. Jedediah was up before dawn. The wooden bird's image burned into his mind. He worked the fields with a fury, trying to sweat out the confusion. It didn't work. Every time he looked toward the barn, he felt a knot tighten in his gut. Around mid-morning, he saw a rider approaching. His heart sank. It was Silas, his nearest neighbor from 5 miles down the creek. Silas was a good man, but his wife had a tongue that could clip a hedge, and news traveled faster than wildfire between them. "Jedediah!" Silas boomed, reining in his horse. "Saw the coach yesterday. Don't tell me you kept her arrival a secret." His eyes scanned the property, hungry for a glimpse of the new bride. Jedediah forced a tight-lipped smile. "Silas, wasn't a secret. Just getting settled." Right on cue, the barn door opened. Eliza emerged, squinting in the bright light. She looked rested, but the wariness hadn't left her eyes. She saw Silas and froze for a half second before composing herself. Silas's eyebrows shot up. He looked from Eliza to Jedediah and back again. Jedediah knew what he was thinking. The woman from the agency photograph was a blonde, rosy-cheeked girl named Sarah. This woman was dark-haired, with a pale, serious face and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. This, this is her? Silas asked, his voice laced with confusion. Jedediah felt the lie solidify in his throat, heavy as stone. This is her, he said. Sarah. He hated the way the name felt on his tongue. Eliza, he had to remember to call her Sarah now, walked toward them. She gave a small, polite nod. A pleasure to meet you, sir. Silas, the neighbor supplied, still looking her up and down. You look different from your picture. The air crackled with tension. Jedediah held his breath. He had trapped himself. Now he had to see if this strange woman could lie her way out of it. She didn't miss a beat. The journey is very taxing, she said, her voice smooth as silk. It changes a person. She placed a hand on Jedediah's arm, a gesture of familiarity that was so bold, so unexpected, it sent a jolt through him. But my Jedediah was here to welcome me. That's all that matters. My Jedediah. The possessiveness of it was a masterstroke. It staked a claim, closing ranks against the outsider. Silas, flustered, could only nod. Well, welcome to the valley, ma'am. His eyes darted around. The child the driver mentioned? Sleeping, Jedediah cut in, his tone sharp. She's not well from the ride. He needed Silas gone, now. But his neighbor lingered, his curiosity still piqued. He gestured toward the stables. One of my mares threw a shoe. Mind if I use your forge, Jed? Fine, Jedediah grunted. He watched as Silas led his horse toward the stables, his gaze still flicking back to the woman who called herself Sarah. The lie had held for now, but it was a fragile thing, a sheet of thin ice over deep, cold water, and they were all standing on it. An hour later, as Silas was hammering away at the forge, one of Jedediah's prized horses, a temperamental gelding named Ghost, began to kick at his stall. The horse had a tendency to get tangled in his own tether, and Jedediah started toward him. Careful with him, Jedediah called out to Eliza, who was standing nearby. He's got a mean streak. Before he could get there, Ghost let out a pained whinny and bucked hard, his back leg catching on the feeding trough with a sickening crack of wood. The horse stumbled, favoring the leg, clearly in pain. Damn it all, Jedediah swore, rushing forward. But Eliza was already moving. She didn't hesitate. She slipped through the rails, her voice low and soothing. Easy now, boy, easy. She ran her hands down the horse's trembling flank, her touch firm and confident. She examined the leg, her fingers probing the swelling joint with an expert's precision. Jedediah stopped in his tracks. Silas paused his hammering, watching. It's a bad sprain, but not broken, she announced, her tone clinical. We need to wrap it. Cold water first, then a poultice. Do you have comfrey root? Jedediah stared at her, dumbfounded. A seamstress from the city? Not a chance. The way she handled the 1,000-pound animal, the way she diagnosed the injury, that wasn't something you learned sewing dresses. That was knowledge born of experience. Yes, in the pantry, he stammered. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. She had slipped. She had revealed a piece of herself she hadn't intended. She quickly looked away. I learned a little about animals growing up, she said, her voice strained. Silas walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. Learned a little. Ma'am, you handle that horse like you were born in a stable. My wife's been around livestock her whole life, and she wouldn't get that close to Ghost. Eliza didn't respond. She just kept her attention on the horse, murmuring to it softly. The lie was fraying at the edges. Jedediah felt a new wave of unease. This woman wasn't just a liar, she was a performer, and he had no idea what role she was truly playing. Later that afternoon, after Silas had finally departed with a story that would surely be all over the valley by nightfall, Jedediah found Lily. The child had ventured out of the barn and was standing by the fence line, watching him work. She was still silent, a tiny, solemn statue in a world too big for her. He kept his distance, not wanting to spook her. He focused on mending a broken fence post, the rhythmic thud of his hammer the only sound between them. After a long while, he felt a small tug on his pant leg. He looked down. Lily was standing beside him, pointing toward the mountains in the distance, their peaks shrouded in cool gray clouds. "Cold," she whispered. The word was so quiet, he almost missed it. It was the first word he'd heard her speak. Her voice was thin, like a bird's. He stopped hammering, his full attention on her. He thought she meant the weather, the autumn chill that was beginning to settle in the air. "It'll get warmer when the sun's high," he said gently. She shook her head, her small face crumpled with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child. She pointed again, more insistently this time, but not at the mountains. She seemed to be pointing at a memory, something far away. "Cold," she repeated, and this time he heard the fear in it. The man. Cold eyes. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down Jedediah's spine. She wasn't talking about the weather. She was talking about a person, a man with cold eyes. Was this the MT from the carved bird? Was he the reason they were running? Before he could ask, she retreated, scurrying back toward the safety of the barn as if she'd said too much. Jedediah stood there, the hammer heavy in his hand. The simple lie about a sick bride was gone. In its place was something far darker. A frightened woman, a silent child, and the looming shadow of a man with cold eyes. He knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't put them on the stagecoach tomorrow. Not until he knew what or who they were running from. The next day, Jedediah knew he had to act. He couldn't live with the questions festering in his own home. He told Eliza he was riding into town for supplies, a lie to cover his real purpose. He needed to send a telegram. He had to contact the marriage agency and ask about Sarah Wallace. Was she truly sick, or had she simply vanished? The town of Redemption was little more than a single dusty street, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled together against the vast emptiness of the plains. He tied his horse outside the telegraph office, his gut churning. This felt like a betrayal, but he had to know the truth. He handed the clerk his message, inquiring about Sarah Wallace. Urgent. Did she depart as planned? Jedediah Thorne. The clerk tapped out the message, the clicks echoing in the quiet room. Should have a reply in a day or two, depending on the lines. Jedediah nodded, paid the man, and stepped back outside. His business was done, but he felt no relief. As he was about to mount his horse, his eyes caught on a notice tacked to the sheriff's board. It was a fresh poster, the paper still clean and white. He walked over, his boots scuffing in the dirt. He read the bold letters at the top. Reward. His eyes scanned the text. It was a notice from a man in the Eastern Territories, a wealthy landowner named Marcus Thorne. The name hit him like a physical blow. MT, the initials on the bird. The poster described a missing woman and child, his wife Clara and his niece Lillian. It said they had been taken, possibly by a woman posing as a governess. It pleaded for any information leading to their safe return, offering a substantial reward. It painted Marcus Thorne as a desperate, heartbroken husband and uncle, trying to find his lost family. And below the text was a detailed artist's rendering of the woman. It was Eliza. There was no mistaking it. Her dark hair, her steady gaze, the determined set of her jaw. It was her. Her real name was Clara, and Lillian, was her niece. Jedediah felt the ground shift beneath him. He had been played for a fool in ways he couldn't even comprehend. He wasn't sheltering a desperate woman. He was harboring a kidnapper, a criminal. He had lied to his neighbor, broken the law, all for a woman who had used him, who had put his entire life at risk. The anger was a hot, white flash. He ripped the poster from the board, his hands shaking. He crumpled it into a ball, shoving it into his coat pocket. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of fury and betrayal. He urged his horse on, the wind whipping at his face, his mind racing. He had to confront her. He had to know the whole ugly truth. And then he was taking her and the child straight to the sheriff. There was no other choice. He burst through the door of the farmhouse without a word, his face a thundercloud. Clara, he would call her by her real name now, was at the hearth, stirring a pot of soup. She looked up, her eyes widening at his expression. Lily was sitting at the table, clutching the small wooden bird. Jedediah strode to the table and slammed the crumpled wanted poster down in front of her. The paper unfurled, revealing her own face, her own name. "Explain this," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Marcus Thorne, your husband, says you kidnapped his niece." Clara stared at the poster, all the color draining from her face. She looked cornered, trapped. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Lily let out a small whimper and hid her face in Clara's skirt. "So the whole thing was a lie," Jedediah continued, the words tumbling out in a torrent of rage. "Sarah, the illness, being sent in her place. All of it. You used me. You used my home to hide from the law." "It's not what you think," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Isn't it?" he shot back. "It says right here you're his wife, that the girl is his niece. It says he's worried sick, offering a reward for your safe return. Sounds to me like a man who loves his family." Clara looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw not the cunning of a criminal, but a deep, bottomless well of despair. "He is my husband," she admitted, her voice cracking, "and Lily is his niece. But he is not the man on that poster. That is a performance, just like everything else he does. The real Marcus. The real Marcus is a monster." She sank into a chair, her composure finally breaking. "Lily's parents died a year ago. They were good people. They left everything to Lily in their will, and they named me as her guardian." Her hand went to Lily's hair, a protective, instinctual gesture. Marcus was furious. He wanted control of her inheritance. He produced another will, a forgery, that named him as guardian and trustee of the estate. He paid off a local judge. No one would listen to me. He locked me in our home. He hurt me when I tried to fight him. She unconsciously rubbed her wrist, the same spot where Jedediah had noticed the faint, yellowing bruise. "He doesn't love Lily," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He sees her as an asset, a key to a fortune. I knew I had to get her out. I found your letter to the agency by chance. I found Sarah Wallace. I paid her everything I had managed to hide over the years. I begged her to let me take her place, to give me a head start. She was a good soul. She agreed to help." Jedediah stood there, his anger warring with the raw, painful story she was telling. It was an incredible tale, a rich, powerful man versus a lone, desperate woman. Who was he to believe? The law printed in black and white on a poster? Or the terror in this woman's eyes? "If this is true," he said, his voice hard, "why run? Why not go to the law in your own town?" "Because he is the law there," she said bitterly. "His money buys judges, sheriffs, everything. You saw the poster. He's painted himself as the victim. Who would believe me? A hysterical wife who kidnapped a poor, orphaned child?" He looked from her to the little girl, who was now peering out from behind Clara's dress, her eyes fixed on him. "The man," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Cold eyes." Jedediah's heart clenched. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But the risk was too great. Harboring a fugitive, a kidnapper. He could lose everything. His ranch, his freedom. He took a deep breath, the decision hardening inside him. "I don't know what to believe," he said, the words feeling like a betrayal. "But I can't be a part of this. In the morning, I'm taking you both to Sheriff Cobb in Redemption. You can tell him your story. Let him sort it out." Clara didn't beg. She didn't plead. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, but her expression was one of weary resignation. She looked defeated. "I understand," she said softly. "You're a good man, Jedediah. You shouldn't have been dragged into this. Just let us have tonight. One last night of peace before he finds us." Her acceptance was more unnerving than any argument would have been. He gave a curt nod and left the house, needing air. He stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks of the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and rust. He had made his choice, the right choice, the safe choice. So why did it feel so terribly wrong? That night, sleep offered no escape. Jedediah tossed and turned, Clara's story echoing in his mind. He kept seeing the fear in Lily's eyes, kept hearing her whisper, "Cold eyes." Was he about to hand them over to a monster? Or was he about to be arrested for aiding a kidnapper? There was no right answer. Unable to rest, he rose and walked to the window. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the yard. He saw a faint light moving in the main room of the house. He slipped on his boots and crept to the door, peering through the crack. Clara was sitting at the table with Lily on her lap. She was holding something that glinted in the lamplight, a silver locket that hung from a chain around her neck. She opened it carefully. Lily leaned in, her expression one of reverence. Jedediah strained to see what was inside. It wasn't a picture. It was a tiny, meticulously folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Clara whispered something to Lily, and the child reached out a small finger to touch the paper, as if it were a sacred relic. What was it? A letter? A map? It was clearly important. It was the heart of their secret, the one thing besides the carved bird that they had carried with them. Before he could ponder it further, he heard the sound of hoofbeats, fast, too fast for a casual night rider. He straightened up, his hand instinctively going to the pistol he kept tucked in his waistband. He moved to the front door, peering out into the moonlit yard. 3 riders were approaching, their forms dark against the silvered landscape. He recognized the middle rider instantly. It was Sheriff Cobb, and flanking him were a deputy and Silas, his neighbor. A cold dread washed over Jedediah. Silas must have ridden to town, his suspicions finally boiling over. He had reported them. Jedediah stepped out onto the porch just as they reined in. "Sheriff," he said, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of his heart. "Late for a social call." Cobb didn't smile. He was a hard man with a face like granite. "No call, Jedediah. Got a report from your neighbor here about a suspicious woman and child at your homestead. A woman who don't match the description of the bride you were expecting?" Silas had the decency to look ashamed, refusing to meet Jedediah's gaze. The sheriff dismounted, pulling a familiar paper from his saddlebag. It was a copy of the wanted poster. "Then this comes in on the afternoon wire, describes a woman named Clara Thorne and a child named Lillian. Says they're missing, maybe taken. The description of the woman, it matches the one Silas gave me of your new guest." He held the poster up. "Now, I'm going to ask you one time, Jedediah. Is this woman inside your house?" This was it, the moment of truth. The house was silent behind him, but he could feel Clara's presence, could feel her terror. He could tell the truth, hand them over, and wash his hands of the whole mess. Save his ranch, save himself. He looked at the sheriff's stony face, then at Silas's guilty one. He thought of Lily's whisper, cold eyes. He thought of the desperate hope he'd seen in Clara's face, even when he told her he was turning her in. He was a man who lived by rules, by contracts, but some things were more important. He made a choice. "My bride is inside, Sheriff," Jedediah said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. He pointed at the poster. "That piece of paper is wrong. My wife's name is Sarah Thorne, and she's resting with her daughter." He used the original name, the name of the lie, and made it his own. Sheriff Cobb's eyes narrowed. He was a dog with a bone, and he didn't like being told to let go. "That's a mighty big coincidence, Jedediah. She looks exactly like the woman on this poster." "Lots of people look alike," Jedediah said, not backing down. "You gonna arrest a woman for having dark hair?" Just then, the door opened behind him. Clara stepped out onto the porch, Lily clinging to her hand. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her eyes were resolute. She had placed her life in his hands, and he had not dropped it. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" she asked, her voice steady. Cobb turned his full attention to her. He studied her face, comparing it to the drawing on the poster. "Ma'am, I have a report that you might be a woman named Clara Thorne." Clara didn't flinch. She was a better actor than he could have ever imagined. She gave a small, tired smile. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. My name is Sarah. My late sister's name was Clara." Perhaps that is the source of the confusion. It was a brilliant, off-the-cuff lie, plausible enough to create doubt. But Cobb wasn't convinced. "Funny," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. The agency that arranged your marriage described a blonde woman. You ain't blonde. The trap was sprung. There was no way to explain that. Jedediah's heart hammered against his ribs. He had gambled and lost. But then Clara did something extraordinary. She held up her right hand, showing a faint, silvery scar that ran across her knuckles. My sister Sarah wrote to Jedediah after sending the agency her photograph, she said, her voice clear and confident. She told him I would be coming in her place because of her illness, and she told him how to recognize me. She mentioned this scar, didn't she, my love? She looked at Jedediah, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to play along. The fate of two lives rested on his answer. He met her gaze. He saw the desperation, the courage, the sheer, terrifying hope. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. She did, Jedediah said, the lie feeling more true than anything he'd said all week. Wrote it in her last letter, a scar on her right hand. Said I'd know it was you. Sheriff Cobb stared from Jedediah to Clara, then back again. The lie was audacious, specific, and delivered by two people in perfect concert. It was enough. The seed of doubt had been planted. He couldn't be sure. Arresting Jedediah Thorne, a respected man, on the flimsy word of a nosy neighbor in a poster from 1,000 miles away, was a risky proposition. He finally grunted, folding the poster and stuffing it back into his bag. All right, Jedediah, for now. He mounted his horse, his eyes like chips of ice. But I'll be watching. You lied to me and you'll find out that my memory is long and the law is patient. This ranch won't be yours for long if you make a fool out of me. The threat was unmistakable. He turned his horse and rode off, the deputy and a thoroughly chastened Silas following behind. Jedediah and Clara stood on the porch, not moving, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night. The silence they left behind was vast and terrifying. He had crossed a line. He had lied to the law, threatened his own livelihood, all for a woman he barely knew. He turned to face her. Clara, he said, the name feeling right for the first time. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You didn't have to do that. Seems I did, he replied, his voice rough. Now, you're going to tell me everything. The whole truth. No more lies. No more secrets. We're in this together now, whether I like it or not. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. All right, Jedediah, the whole truth. They went inside and, as the night deepened, the secrets finally came pouring out. Clara told him the full story. Lily's parents, her brother and his wife, had died in a factory fire. They were inventors, brilliant people who had created a new type of grain thresher that was set to make them wealthy. The will was ironclad. Everything went to their daughter Lillian, with Clara, her beloved aunt, named as sole guardian. Marcus Thorne, Clara's husband, had been her brother's business partner. He was a man consumed by greed and envy. He saw the inheritance as his own. The forged will he produced was a masterpiece of deceit, and with his influence, he had it validated by a corrupt court. The only thing I managed to save was this, she said, opening the silver locket around her neck. She carefully unfolded the tiny, brittle piece of paper. It's the signature page from the original will. It has my brother's signature, his wife's, and two witnesses. It's the only proof I have that the other will is a fake. Jedediah examined the paper. The signatures were clear. It felt real. Why didn't you show this to anyone? He asked. Who would I show it to? She replied, her voice filled with a weary frustration. Any judge or lawyer in our county is in Marcus's pocket. They'd simply destroy it, and I'd have nothing. I needed to get to a different territory, to a federal judge, someone beyond his reach. That's why I had to run. It all made a terrible kind of sense. The desperation, the intricate lies. She wasn't a kidnapper. She was a rescuer. So what's the plan now? He asked, the we in his question, unspoken but deeply felt. The plan was to get here, to disappear, she said, to live a quiet life as Sarah Wallace until I could find a way to get this evidence to the right people. But now, she trailed off. Marcus knew where she was headed. Sheriff Cobb was suspicious. The town was watching. Her plan was in shambles. His reach is long, Jedediah muttered, thinking of the poster. He'll send men. Not just the law. Men who don't care about badges. They were no longer just hiding. They were a target. He looked around the small, sturdy farmhouse he had built with his own two hands. It had always been his fortress, his sanctuary from the world. Now it was about to become a battleground. He'll be watching the roads, the stagecoaches, Jedediah said, his mind working, shifting from farmer to strategist. We can't leave that way, but I know this land. There are old mountain passes, trails the miners used to use. They're dangerous, but they'll get us into the next territory without anyone seeing. A glimmer of hope returned to Clara's eyes. Can we do it? Can we make it? We can, he said, his voice firm. He was in this now, all the way. He would see them to safety. We'll rest one more day, gather supplies. We leave at dawn, the day after tomorrow. The next day passed in a blur of tense preparation. Jedediah packed saddlebags with dried meat, hardtack, and ammunition. Clara mended their clothes, her hands moving with a nervous energy. Lily, sensing the shift in the air, was even quieter than usual, a small shadow following Clara from room to room, clutching her wooden bird. Late in the afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. It wasn't the sheriff. This man was different. He wore a city suit, ill-fitting for the saddle, and rode with an air of grim purpose. He dismounted at the porch and approached without hesitation. "Jedediah Thorne?" the man asked. He was thin, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Who's asking?" Jedediah replied, his hand resting on the axe he'd been using to chop wood. "My name is Finch," the man said, producing a small leather case and flipping it open. "Pinkerton Detective Agency." Jedediah's blood ran cold. Pinkertons. He'd assumed they would be hired by Marcus. "If you're here for the reward," Jedediah started, "you're wasting your time. The woman on that poster isn't here." Finch's expression didn't change. "I'm not here about Marcus Thorne's poster, Mr. Thorne. I'm not working for him." He paused, his sharp eyes flicking toward the house. "I was hired by the family of a young woman from back east, a woman named Sarah Wallace." The name hit Jedediah like a punch to the gut. "Her family hasn't heard from her in weeks," Finch continued, his voice cold and precise. "They reported her missing. We tracked her last known movements. She purchased a stagecoach ticket west, a ticket paid for by you. But our investigation showed she never got on that coach. Instead, we found a witness who saw her talking with another woman, a woman who matched her ticket and then boarded in her place, a woman who fits your current house guest description." Clara had appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. Finch's gaze locked onto her. "But that's not the worst of it. Last week, a land surveyor found a body in the woods, 20 miles from the stagecoach depot." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and dreadful. "The body was identified 2 days ago," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It was Sarah Wallace. She'd been murdered." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah wasn't just paid off. She wasn't just missing. She was dead. Finch took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Clara's horrified face. "The last person seen with Sarah Wallace was you, ma'am. You paid her a large sum of money, then you took her ticket, took her name, and took her destination. And then she wound up dead." He looked from Clara to Jedediah, his expression hardening into one of cold certainty. "I'm not here to ask questions about a kidnapping, Mr. Thorne," Finch said, his voice dropping. "I'm here to arrest this woman for murder." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and lethal as a blade. Murder. The word was a violent intrusion, a brutal shattering of the fragile hope they had started to build. Clara stared at Finch, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be. She was alive. She was fine when I left her." "That's what they all say," Finch said, his tone dismissive. He took another step toward the porch. "Don't make this difficult, ma'am." Jedediah moved, placing himself between Finch and Clara. "You're not taking her anywhere." Finch's eyes narrowed. "Are you obstructing a murder investigation, Mr. Thorne? That's a serious crime. I can have the sheriff and a dozen deputies here in half a day. Don't throw your life away for a killer." "She's not a killer," Jedediah insisted, though a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at his mind. The evidence was damning. She had the motive to silence the one person who knew about her switched identity. She had the opportunity. I didn't do it, Clara said, her voice stronger now, laced with a desperate fury. Why would I kill her? She was helping me. She was a kind person. The money you paid her is now blood money, Finch retorted. Perhaps she wanted more. Perhaps she threatened to expose you. It's a classic story. It was all falling apart. Every lie, every choice Jedediah had made was leading him to this moment, to defending a woman who was now the prime suspect in a murder. His protection of her had turned from a moral choice into a criminal act. As Finch reached inside his coat, likely for a pair of manacles, a tiny voice cut through the tension. The man. Everyone turned. Lily was standing in the doorway, her small body trembling. She had been silent for so long, but now she spoke, her voice clear and piercing. She pointed a shaky finger, not at anyone present, but at the empty space before them, at a memory only she could see. The man with the cold eyes, she said, her voice gaining strength. He was on the train. Finch paused, his hand still in his coat. What's the child talking about? Clara knelt down, her focus entirely on Lily. What man, sweet girl? What did you see? Before we left, Lily said, her words coming in a rush. At the station. You were buying food. I saw him. The cold man. He was talking to the nice lady. To Sarah. Jedediah's mind reeled. Marcus. Marcus was at the train station. He didn't see me, Lily continued, her eyes wide with the memory. He was talking to her. He looked angry. He gave her a letter. The pieces crashed into place with sickening force. Jedediah looked at Finch, his voice urgent. Don't you see? It was him. It was Marcus Thorne. Finch looked skeptical. The grieving husband? Why would he kill the woman helping his wife escape? Because he's not a grieving husband, Jedediah exclaimed, the full monstrous picture becoming clear. He's a killer. He knew Clara's plan. He must have followed her or anticipated her move. He didn't just chase her. He got ahead of her. He intercepted the one person who could help her, the one person who knew the truth. Clara looked up, her face a dawning horror. He killed her to stop the switch from happening cleanly. He knew if I arrived here and Sarah was just missing, it would be suspicious. But if she was found dead, then you wouldn't just be a runaway wife, Jedediah finished, the cold logic of it chilling him to the bone. You'd be a wanted murderer. Your story, the will, everything. No one would ever believe you. He framed you. Perfectly. The ranch was no longer a sanctuary. It was the final piece of Marcus Thorne's trap. He knew this was Sarah's destination. He knew this was where Clara would be. He had engineered the entire situation, painting Clara as a killer, so that when he finally arrived to reclaim his stolen niece, he would be seen as a hero, a righteous man bringing a criminal to justice, and he was coming. Jedediah knew it with absolute certainty. Finch stood there processing the torrent of new information. He looked from Jedediah's impassioned face to Clara's terrified one, and finally down to the small child who had just turned his entire case on its head. He was a man who dealt in facts, in evidence, but he was also a man who had seen the depths of human depravity. He slowly pulled his hand from his coat. It was empty. All right, Finch said, his voice low and serious. I'm not saying I believe you, but I'm willing to hear you out. For now, the arrest can wait. He looked out at the long road leading to the ranch, his eyes scanning the horizon. But if what you're saying is true, then your husband isn't just sending the law. He's coming to finish what he started. The three of them, the rancher, the fugitive, and the detective, stood together on the porch, a strange and desperate alliance forged in the face of a common enemy. The quiet ranch was no longer a hiding place. It was a cage, and the predator was closing in. The sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows that crept toward the house like grasping fingers. There was no more talk of running. It was too late. Marcus knew where they were. Any attempt to flee now would be suicide. He'll come at dawn, Jedediah said, his voice grim. He'll want the advantage of the light. And he won't be alone, Finch added. Men like Thorne don't do their own dirty work. He'll have hired guns, maybe even a deputized posse, using that poster as his legal authority. The farmhouse, once a symbol of Jedediah's independence, now felt small and vulnerable. They had to make a stand. "We'll barricade the doors and windows," Jedediah said, taking command. He was on his own land, and he would defend it. "Clara, you and Lily stay in the cellar. It's the safest place." "No," Clara said, her voice firm. She held up her hands, the hands that had soothed a panicked horse. "I'm not a helpless victim. I can't shoot, but I can load. I can help. Show me what to do." Jedediah looked at her, seeing a strength he had not recognized before. This was not the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach. This was a fighter. He nodded curtly. "All right, Finch, you take the front windows. I'll take the back." They worked through the twilight hours, a silent, efficient team. They dragged heavy furniture against the doors. Jedediah pulled out his 2 rifles and his shotgun, laying out boxes of ammunition on the kitchen table. He showed Clara how to load the spare rifle, her movements quick and precise as she followed his instructions. Finch proved his worth, his detective's mind analyzing every angle of attack. "He'll try to draw our fire, get a sense of our numbers," he reasoned. "We shoot only when we have a clear target." As darkness fell, a tense quiet settled over the ranch. Jedediah found Clara in the main room, sitting with Lily, who had fallen asleep, her small head resting in her aunt's lap, the wooden bird still clutched in her hand. "You should get some rest," Jedediah said softly. Clara shook her head. "I can't. I keep thinking about Sarah. She died because of me." "She died because of Marcus," Jedediah corrected her gently. "She knew the risk. She chose to help you. That makes her a hero, not a victim." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the coming dawn pressing down on them. In the space of 2 days, his world had been turned upside down. He had been lied to, threatened, and was now preparing for a gunfight to protect a woman and child he barely knew. And yet, he felt no regret. In protecting them, he was protecting something in himself, a belief that justice was worth fighting for, even when the law was on the wrong side. Dawn broke with a cold gray light. Jedediah was at the back window, rifle in hand. Finch was at the front. The world was unnervingly still. Then they saw them, a group of riders, at least a dozen men, cresting the ridge. They moved with a confident, predatory slowness, spreading out to surround the house. At their head was a man on a fine black horse, dressed in expensive Eastern clothes that looked ridiculous in the rugged landscape. He was tall, imposing, and even from a distance, Jedediah could feel the arrogance radiating from him. Marcus Thorne had arrived. He halted his men 100 yards from the house, well out of pistol range. Jedediah watched him through the rifle sights. He had a handsome face, but Lily was right. His eyes were cold, devoid of warmth or compassion. "Clara!" Marcus's voice boomed across the yard, slick and commanding. "My dear, this foolishness has gone on long enough. Send out my niece. Come out yourself, and I will be lenient." Clara, who was crouched near the fireplace, loading the spare rifle, flinched at the sound of his voice. "He's lying," she whispered. "We know," Jedediah said. Marcus continued his speech, his voice dripping with false concern. "The man inside, the rancher. You are harboring a fugitive and a murderer. The law is with me. Send them out, and you will live." Finch peered through his window. "He has a man with a star on his chest, a bought lawman. That gives his posse a veneer of legality." The hired guns were getting restless, shifting in their saddles, their rifles ready. They were waiting for the order. "They're going to rush the house," Finch said. "We can't hold them off for long." Jedediah's mind raced. They couldn't win a direct fight. They needed a diversion, an escape. His eyes fell on the stone-lined well house just outside the kitchen door, and an idea, desperate and dangerous, took root. "The irrigation ditch," he said to Finch. "I dug it last spring. It runs from the well house underground all the way to the north pasture. It's narrow, but a woman and child could fit." Finch understood immediately. "A way out, while we keep them busy here." "Clara," Jedediah called, keeping his voice low. "Listen to me. When the shooting starts, you take Lily. You run to the well house. Follow the ditch. It will take you to the creek. Follow the creek north. Don't stop for anything. You understand?" She looked from him to Finch, her eyes wide with fear. I can't leave you. You must, he said, his voice hard. This fight is for you and Lily to get away. If you stay, we all die for nothing. Now go. Get her ready. Clara hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded, a look of fierce resolve on her face. She went to the sleeping child and gently woke her. Jedediah took a deep breath. He looked at Finch. Ready? The Pinkerton gave a grim smile. Let's make some noise. Jedediah raised his rifle, took aim at a water barrel near Marcus's horse, and fired. The shot cracked through the morning silence. The barrel exploded, sending water and splinters everywhere. The posse, startled, raised their rifles. The siege had begun. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets thudded into the thick log walls of the farmhouse. Finch returned fire from the front, a methodical, steady rhythm. Jedediah fired from the back, aiming not to kill, but to disrupt, to keep their heads down. Amid the chaos, he saw Clara, holding Lily's hand, slip out the back door. They scrambled across the few feet of open ground and disappeared into the well house. They were on their way. He just had to buy them enough time. He and Finch kept up a steady barrage, moving from window to window, creating the illusion of more defenders than there were. But the hired guns were professionals. One of them, a man with a long coat and two pistols, was methodically directing the others, pushing them to advance. Suddenly, the shooting from the front of the house intensified. A moment later, Finch staggered back from the window, his hand clutching his shoulder. I'm hit! Jedediah rushed to his side. The wound was bloody, but it looked like the bullet had gone clean through. How bad? I'll live, Finch grunted, tearing a strip from his shirt to create a makeshift bandage. But I can't hold this side much longer. At that moment, a shout went up from outside. Jedediah peered through a crack in the wall. The man in the long coat was pointing toward the north pasture. He'd seen something. He knew. No, Jedediah breathed. They had anticipated the escape. The hired gun barked an order, and half the men wheeled their horses around, galloping toward the creek to cut them off. The plan had failed. Jedediah knew there was only one thing left to do. He couldn't let them be taken. He looked at Finch, who nodded, understanding. Jedediah threw down his rifle, kicked open the front door, and walked out into the yard, his hands raised high. The shooting stopped. All eyes turned to him. Marcus Thorne spurred his horse forward, a triumphant sneer on his face. The coward surrenders. A wise choice. The fight is over, Jedediah said, his voice loud and clear for all the men to hear. Let the woman and child go. They're innocent. Your business is with me. Marcus laughed, a cold, ugly sound. My business is with my wife, the murderer, and my niece. My property. As for you, you'll hang for this. Just then, two of his men returned from the creek, dragging Clara and Lily with them. Clara fought, but she was no match for them. Lily was crying, her face buried in her aunt's dress. They were shoved forward, stumbling in the dirt. Marcus dismounted and strode toward them. He grabbed Clara by the arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Did you really think you could escape me? He hissed. Jedediah started forward, but two gunmen leveled their rifles at his chest. He was helpless. It was over. He had lost. This is the proof, Clara cried out, her voice filled with a last desperate shred of defiance. She fumbled with the locket around her neck, pulling out the small folded paper. This is the true will. My brother's signature is right here. He named me guardian. Marcus snatched the paper from her hand and glanced at it with contempt. A meaningless scrap. Who will believe a murderer's evidence? He held it up for his men to see. She is a liar and a killer. Justice will be done. His posse murmured in agreement. The bought lawman nodded grimly. The lie had won. But as Marcus held the paper aloft, Jedediah's eyes were drawn to something else. The small wooden bird, which had fallen from Lily's grasp and now lay in the dirt at her feet. He remembered the initials, M.T. He had assumed they stood for Marcus Thorne, but that never felt right. He looked at Lily, who was staring at her uncle with pure terror. Lily, Jedediah said, his voice cutting through the tension. Who made that bird for you? Lily looked at the bird, then at Marcus. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. He did, she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at her uncle. Then she shook her head vehemently. No, not him. Her eyes met Jedediah's, and a clear, certain memory surfaced. My papa, she said, her voice small but firm. My papa made it for me. Jedediah's heart pounded. Of course, it wasn't a gift from her uncle. It was a keepsake from her father. He took a step forward, ignoring the rifles aimed at him. Let me see the bird, he said. One of the gunmen kicked it toward him. Jedediah picked it up, his hand surprisingly steady. He turned it over. The initials were there, clear as day. MT. Marcus Thorne, Jedediah said, looking directly at the man. Your middle name is Philip, isn't it? Marcus frowned, confused by the question. What of it? So these aren't your initials, Jedediah continued, his voice rising. He looked at Finch, who was now standing in the doorway, pale but resolute. Finch, you investigated Sarah Wallace. What was her full name? The Pinkerton, piecing it together, replied instantly. Sarah Ann Wallace. No, Jedediah said, a sudden blinding insight striking him. That was her married name, wasn't it? What was her maiden name? Finch paused, thinking. I believe it was Templeton. Sarah Templeton. M.T. Lily's father's last name was Templeton, but there was another set of initials, smaller, carved just below. He had missed them before. S.W. He held the bird up high, his voice ringing out across the silent yard. S.W. Sarah Wallace. That was her name. The woman you were supposed to meet. Then he looked at Clara, and the final shocking piece of the puzzle fell into place. The full truth. She wasn't just some woman you paid, was she, Clara? He asked, his voice gentle. The woman who was coming here. The woman Marcus murdered. Sarah Wallace was your sister, wasn't she? Lily's other aunt. Clara gasped, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. Yes, we were going to meet here. Start a new life together. All three of us. The revelation hit the posse like a physical blow. The story changed completely. This wasn't a stranger helping a fugitive. This was a family trying to reunite. Sarah wasn't just a loose end Marcus needed to tie up. She was the other legal guardian. By killing her, Marcus wasn't just framing Clara. He was eliminating the only other person with a legitimate claim to Lily's guardianship. The motive was no longer just greed. It was a cold-blooded murder to secure a fortune. The hired guns looked at each other, their certainty wavering. The bought lawman took a step back, his face suddenly pale. This wasn't the simple job they'd signed up for. It's a lie, Marcus bellowed, but his voice held a new note of panic. She's twisting things. But the truth was too powerful. It was there in Clara's tears, in Lily's small voice, in the initials carved into a child's toy. A new voice cut through the air. That's enough, Thorne. Everyone turned. Sheriff Cobb stood at the edge of the property, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. He wasn't alone. A half-dozen grim-faced ranchers, Silas among them, stood with him, their own rifles ready. He had been watching, waiting, letting the truth play out. I heard enough, Cobb said, walking forward. Murder, forgery, witness tampering. Marcus Thorne, you're under arrest. The bought lawman threw down his badge in disgust. The hired guns, seeing the tables had turned, slowly lowered their weapons. It was over. Marcus Thorne stared, his handsome face contorted in a mask of pure rage and disbelief. His perfect plan had been unraveled by a rancher, a detective, and the memory of a 5-year-old child. He made a desperate lunge for Clara, but Jedediah was faster. He stepped in, and with one powerful blow sent the man sprawling into the dirt. The fight was over. Justice, real justice, had finally come to Jedediah's ranch. In the quiet aftermath, as Sheriff Cobb led Marcus and his disgraced men away, the small group stood on the porch. Finch was getting his shoulder properly bandaged by a repentant Silas. The sun was rising higher, washing the valley in a clean, hopeful light. Clara stood beside Jedediah, watching Lily, who was now chasing a butterfly in the yard, her laughter echoing in the morning air. For the first time since she arrived, the child looked free. Thank you, Jedediah, Clara said, her voice soft. You saved us. You believed me when no one else would have. He looked at the woman who had arrived under a cloud of lies, the wrong bride in every possible way. He looked at the child who had been a silent mystery. They had turned his solitary life upside down, brought violence and fear to his doorstep. But they had also brought something else. Purpose. A reason to fight. "I guess you weren't the wrong bride after all," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You were just early." She smiled back. A real smile this time. And it was like watching the sun rise. He knew his life would never be the same. The ranch he'd built for a family he'd ordered from a catalog finally had one. A real one. Forged not by contract but by fire and faith. They were home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.